All right, welcome everybody. I'm grateful that everyone's able to join this afternoon. This is I think, going to be a really good session. AGM season is upon us. I'm seeing a handful of our clients, a handful of co-ops issuing notice for AGMs. So I hope that the information we share today is timely. Before I get into the material, I do want to start us off in a good way. So I'll share a land acknowledgement. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are located on Treaty 6 territory, home of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. We acknowledge that this land was not ceded, but that the purpose of the treaties was to ensure the land would be shared. Indigenous people have been cooperating in these territories for thousands of years, and it is through cooperation that all our communities will continue to thrive. I recognize that we are meeting in an online environment, and we have people joining us from all over Turtle Island and beyond. I recognize one of our friends from South Africa here. So I encourage you to acknowledge the people and the ancestors of the place that you call home in your own way. I'd also love to hear from everybody where you're located, what you're up to as it relates to co-ops. We do have a few too many hands in the call today. So maybe if in the chat, you could leave your name, where you're joining us from, and what you do with co-ops or in the co-op sector. We'd love to hear it. Okay. So today I'll share my screen here in a moment and do an overview of co-op AGMs and the steps you'll take to prepare for one. And then at the end of the session, we'll have time for Q&A. So if you do have a question at any point, do feel free to fire it in the chat. I'll do a good scroll back at the end to find any questions that were asked during the session. But if you do want to ask your question and maybe have a conversation at the end of today's session, there will be dedicated time towards the end. I also will apologize off the hop. I'm a little under the weather. I've got a bit of a sinus infection, it feels like. And so I might be taking tea breaks a little bit more regularly than normal. But I thank you all for bearing with me. Okay, let's share my screen and we can go ahead and get into it. All right, your co-op's AGM, a step-by-step guide. I should say that this is going to be fairly generalized to make it fit for big co-ops, small co-ops. I'll maybe make some distinctions that different kinds of co-ops will have to consider as we work through it and just draw on some of the experiences we've worked on. Worth noting, of course, Co-operatives First works across 5 jurisdictions, the 4 Western provinces, and federal co-ops. And I know on the call we've got folks from across the world. And so some of the things I'll say are general. Most of these things I think are true across jurisdictions, but it is always important to double check relevant co-op regulations as it pertains to your co-op's AGM and annual compliance measures. Okay, so our last webinar focused on your financial year end and what your co-op needs to do once its year ends. Assuming we all follow the calendar year, that's now happened, and we're probably in the midst of AGM planning. So we'll kick it off with talking about your year end and your financial compilation. We'll talk about how to prepare your co-op's annual report. We'll then move into discussing resolutions that need to be decided at your co-op's AGM and how to put together your co-op's agenda, how you'll then go about issuing notice and what logistics you need to consider for planning an AGM, and then we'll wrap up today's session with a Q&A. Okay, so we're going to talk about our year end and what that means for your co-op, and particularly your co-op's board and management are going to be doing most of this work. So assuming your co-op operates in the calendar year, which means your fiscal year end is December 31st, in the immediate weeks following December 31st, you're going to be finalizing your co-op's finances. You're going to be rounding up any receipts from 2025. You're going to be trying to pay any invoices. Perfectly fine if you don't. You can certainly carry those things forward in accounts payable or accounts receivable. But you're going to try to work towards closing the books for the co-op. Now, some of the big year-end decisions that probably were happening in December or could be happening in March if you observe the government year with the year ending in March 31st. Some of those key year-end decisions include making extra expenditures. Maybe you're carrying out some repairs. Maybe there's bigger purchases that you need to complete. Worth noting that big purchases may be amortized by your auditor or by your bookkeeper. And then you're also going to be making contributions to your reserve fund. Reserve fund contributions are usually somewhat regulated by your cooperative's bylaws. So, of course, check your co-op's bylaws to see what the minimum reserve fund contribution has to be per annum, and then go from there. Your cooperative may also issue patronage dividends if your cooperative is a for-profit co-op. And that would be, of course, generally pre-tax, but your board will make a decision on how much they want to allocate in the form of patronage to members. And then beyond that, how much they want to retain in equity and how much they want to distribute to cash. Most of these decisions are made just before the end of the fiscal year or just after. And so once you've got that complete picture for the 2025 or 2025-26 financial year, you're going to close your books and then work with your bookkeeper or treasurer or financial manager, whoever it is in your organization that oversees that process, and you're going to bring your financial reports up to date. And there isn't any right way to do this. And regardless of the software you use, be it Sage or QuickBooks or just an Excel spreadsheet, you'll find countless videos online about completing a financial compilation if you need some guidance. If you do need service providers, we do have a few bookkeepers that we work with at Cooperatives First. In particular, one of our former clients is called Ambient Bookkeeping Workers Employment Cooperative. So it's a worker-owned cooperative that provides bookkeeping services. Okay, and once your financials are closed, you've got your full picture for 2025, you'll then need to prepare your financial compilation. And the compilation is just the collection of data from the past 12 months into one consolidated report. Generally, what you'll end up providing is a balance sheet that shows the assets, liabilities, and equity for the co-op. You'll provide an operating statement, which provides a snapshot of the revenue and expenses for the fiscal year. If your cooperative is more than 1 year old, you'll need to provide year-over-year comparisons. So you'll provide 2024 and 2025 in these statements. And it is optional to provide a cash flow statement, but it is becoming standard practice, I would say, for organizations to include a cash flow statement in their annual report and in their financial statements. So those I would say, are your general things that you'll need to prepare. And then you may have a choice to audit or not. Of course, whether your cooperative needs to undergo an audit generally is determined at the previous annual general meeting. The members of a co-op will appoint the auditor on recommendation from the board of directors. And so the auditor that you'll work with right now for the AGM held in the next few months would have been appointed at the previous annual general meeting. And if you're a new cooperative, you may be asking, do we need to appoint an auditor or not? For this answer, double check your co-op legislation. I've included the general provisions for the 5 jurisdictions where we work in Manitoba, Alberta, and the Federal Co-ops Act. Non-distributing cooperatives do not need to undergo audits. So generally, if you're not issuing securities or if you're not raising a significant amount of money from individuals, you don't need to undergo an audit. If you're in Saskatchewan, you only need to undergo an audit. There's a few weird caveats. If you're over 20 members, if you receive a lot of government funding, if you're providing services for people other than your members, there's a few obscure things that the Saskatchewan government indicates. And in British Columbia, again, it's similar to the distributing cooperatives language, but there's some provisions in there around the nature of business for your cooperative. If you're not really sure about whether or not you need to seek an audit, double check the act, touch base with us if you like, or contact a bookkeeper or lawyer. They'd be able to help provide that interpretation for you. Additionally, to consider is you may have a request to provide audited or reviewed financial statements by a lender, by your bank, or by a government if you're receiving government funds. So again, there might be other reasons why you need to undergo an audit beyond simply the Cooperatives Act. And if you are working with an auditor, once you complete your financial compilation and you've got all of your financial data from the past year, you're then going to engage that auditor. You're probably going to have a bit of a back and forth with them around timing. One of my good friends is an auditor with, I believe, Ernst & Young, and they're just overworked this time of year. They're working 6 days a week. They're trying to stay on top of things. If your co-op is getting its audit this time of year, so are oodles of other co-ops and other businesses. And so it's a busy time of year to undergo an audit, so you may need to be a little patient with when they get back to you. Once you do, however, turn over your financial records and your financial statements, it's helpful to have them to grant them access to whatever data they might need. It's probably going to take a couple of weeks, I would say. And that's going to be important for the timeline for planning your annual meeting. You're going to need to take those few weeks into consideration as the auditor works through your financial data. They may have to come back to you for questions. They might not, understand the business that you're working in. And so they could be asking some questions about what kind of expense is this? Where would this fall maybe on your operating statement or balance sheet in terms of revenue or expenses? Just to properly categorize things and make sense of an organization with which they're not really familiar. So yeah, it's likely there's going to be some back and forth while the auditor is conducting their process. And eventually they're going to come back to you with a report. And that report is going to be pretty similar, I would say, in my experience, to the financial reports that you furnished to them. But it is going to be fact-checked, confirmed, and in the event there are any discrepancies, they're going to maybe make a note or two on that. Those aren't necessarily a bad thing. You might find some stuff online that says auditor's notes are a red flag. That's not always the case. An organization I do some volunteer work with, we host a big cash-based flea market. One of our auditor's notes is that there's no way of confirming, that the revenue we're reporting from that event is 100% accurate, simply because you can misplace, a $5 bill, a $10 bill. It happens. So they have to take us at our word that the revenue we've reported is accurate. So you'll receive that report. And then your board is then responsible for preparing your annual report. And the annual report is one of the primary reasons you're meeting at an annual general meeting. It is to provide information to the members of the co-op through the annual report. And at a minimum, the minimum you need to provide your members at the annual general meeting will be a balance sheet and the operating statement. And again, if your cooperative is more than 1 year old, you'll need to provide comparative statements for at least 2 years. That's the minimum. So the annual report, I think we often have a perception of annual reports being these documents, these big thick booklets that cost a couple $1,000 for graphic design and whatnot. Not necessarily, no. If you're a small co-op, you're in the early stages, All you need to be providing your members is the balance sheet and the operating statement, and ideally a bit of an overview of what people are reading, providing a little bit of context for what the financials mean is really helpful. If your cooperative is maybe a little further along, and particularly if you want to help members really understand how your co-op's working and adding some context to the financial reports that you've provided, you might include some of these things. So I mentioned earlier that a cash flow statement is increasingly becoming popular for organizations to share. I find them to be, they're the harder of the three financial statements to read and interpret. But for folks who are interested and have maybe they have their livelihood attached to the cooperative, understanding, if the co-op's at risk of running out of cash, that might be an important part of the picture and it might help provide them some important context. So providing, a little bit more information never hurts. If you've undergone an audit, you do need to provide an auditor's report. Lots of organizations that are larger co-ops, and I know we have a few on the call today, they will often have their auditor come and speak at the annual general meeting and answer questions from the membership. If you've got staff, if you've got a manager, I would say it's helpful to have at least a one-page manager's report that provides a good summary of some of the key decisions made over the past year. And again, adds some of the context to the financials for why certain decisions were made, why certain expenses are showing up, and just helps provide that more robust story for the past year. If you don't have staff, then a president's report or a board report might do the trick. I think for the few boards I serve on right now, we're all volunteers. We have contractual staff, not any permanent staff. And so I usually write up a short one-page report that just notes some of the highlights, some of the things that members maybe saw or heard about, but may have forgotten. And so it provides them that good picture for what we did this past year. And then if you've got slightly more sophisticated operations, you might want to provide reports for the varied lines of work or types of businesses that you do. I know our colleagues at Federated Co-op or Arctic Co-op, they do a really good job providing an overview of sustainability, of their financial department, for what they're doing with consumer relations, for what they're doing on the governance portfolio. So speaking directly to different departments, whether that's by department heads who are staff or committees of the board, that might add a more richness to describe the work that the co-op's done over the past year. But again, all of those are optional, unless you have to undergo an audit, in which you do need to include the auditor's report. And the goal of your annual report, one, you have to do it. The Cooperatives Act for your jurisdiction will say you need to provide this information to members, and they'll cite the two reports that you have to provide every year. So you have to do that. And then when you file your annual return, you have to tick that box that says, yeah, we've done that. We have to provide that. But it's also, again, one of the fiduciary duties of a director of a co-op is to inform the members, to report back. Because, of course, our boards are accountable to the membership, and this is our way of kind of doing a performance check-in, is providing that annual report. It's also a really good opportunity to celebrate some of those successes of the co-op. I know a number of the co-ops in the cooperative retailing system and some of the credit unions, they're approaching their centennial celebrations. Those are wonderful things to then celebrate at an annual general meeting with your membership all coming together. And if you've got big changes coming for where the co-op is headed, if the board is setting new strategies, you might want to talk about that with members. I've been to a handful of AGMs where a portion of the agenda is simply dedicated to an open discussion about ways the co-op is doing elections, about the different lines of business that the co-op is doing, about whether they want to amalgamate or partner with other organizations. And your AGM can help start that conversation. You can certainly share that with members in advance of the meeting to give them some context and help them more meaningfully participate in the governance of their co-op. Okay, we'll shift gears a little bit and we'll talk now about the formal decisions and process that needs to happen at your annual general meeting. I'm assuming that everybody on the call has been to an annual general meeting. So you've probably, experienced this. But every AGM has its own, flavor. If there's a conflict or something that you're working through or some unique provision you have to get past, that might color things a little bit, but I'll give you the basics that has to be done at your AGM and what you have to plan for. And then I'll note some of the more optional things. Okay, so at every annual general meeting, there are only 3 resolutions that have to be on the agenda. Obviously, you can have the motion to move the acceptance of the agenda, the motion to move the minutes from the past meeting. But when it comes to the formal resolutions, the reason we are here at the annual general meeting, these are the 3 resolutions that are most important. So the first one, you have to have a resolution to approve the annual report that's been provided by the directors to the members. We kind of touched on what the annual report is. It is the primary way for the board to communicate back to the members how their co-op is doing, how it's performing, as part of their accountability to the members. You have to have a resolution to appoint an auditor for the coming fiscal year or waive the appointment of an auditor for the coming fiscal year. So you'll need to do that every year. I think depending on what province you're in, to waive the appointment of an auditor, you might need a special resolution for that. So a special majority might be required. And then every year you're to undergo an election of directors. And generally attached to that is a resolution to declare the directors elected to their positions after formal voting has taken place. Similarly, if there is an uncontested election, if, for example, you have only 2 seats available on your board and only 2 people are seeking election, you could then have a resolution to declare those directors elected by acclamation. So those are the 3 resolutions you have to have. I'll share a link at the end to our resource website, the Co-op Creator, which is a website we maintain that provides tools and templates for co-ops. There's a tool on there called the 3 resolutions you need for your co-op's AGM. And in there, we provide the wording that can be used and adapted for your co-op if you want to use those for your upcoming AGM. Okay, but there may be other resolutions that take place at your AGM. And there's a whole host of things that could be decided. You could have special business that takes place, an amalgamation, dissolution, hopefully not, the removal of a director, any number of things. Your bylaws will provide guidance on what's considered a special resolution, or what needs to fall under special business. If you need to make amendments to your bylaws, your articles, or if you're in BC, your memorandum and rules of association, you might also want to consolidate that into your annual general meeting rather than calling a special members meeting. So again, check the provisions in your bylaws regarding amendments to determine what kind of resolution that needs to be. Worth noting that some resolutions, particularly if they're noted as special business in your bylaws, the wording of those resolutions may need to be included in the notice for the meeting. So for example, if you're amending a couple of bylaws in the notice that goes to members, you may need to say there'll be resolutions amending the bylaw dealing with director of qualifications, for example. You might not need to provide the exact wording per se, but you do need to give them notice that there is a special resolution on the agenda. If your co-op is undergoing the removal of a director or a member, some co-ops will deal with that at the annual general meeting rather than calling special members' meetings. So again, most co-ops will remove directors by special resolution if there's no other recourse internally. And then if members have been removed for whatever reason, and they're appealing that decision, they'll possibly be doing that at the AGM, making an appeal to the membership. And then be sure to consult your bylaws. Some cooperatives will provide for specific resolutions that have to take place in their bylaws. For example, I was part of a charity that provided in its bylaws that we would present a budget for the coming fiscal year to our membership. That's atypical. That's not always the case. But because that was in there, we had to have on the agenda an ordinary resolution to approve a budget for the coming fiscal year. So do be aware that there may be things in your bylaws that need to make their way onto the agenda. All right. Hey, and I thought of a couple of different ways to present this, but I figured I would just put, the most basic template agenda up on the screen. Here's what I would say, at a minimum, your agenda is going to look like. You might add things here and there. You might add a little bit more detail under reports. There may be a few things that you discuss under new business. There may be Q&A. There may be room for discussion, but generally, this is what you're going to look at. You'll call the meeting to order and approve the agenda. I generally make it a habit and best practice to review the rules of order for that meeting, just so people are clear how they are to vote, whether or not they need to move or second things. If you're in a larger hall, you may have microphones in place so that people can share information. You may also have certain requirements for how people identify themselves. A large number of the CRS members, the Cooperative Retailing System here in Western Canada, they'll require that people will share their member number along with their name. So things like that, it's important to review before you get into the crux of the meeting. You'll then have a review of the minutes of the last meeting. There might be errors or omissions that need correcting. Generally, it's just a quick approval. You can then get into reports, and here you'll review the annual report for the cooperative, maybe the auditor's report. But if you've got any other reports from staff, the board, committees, what have you, here you might have someone speak to those. So this section can actually be quite long, depending on how much information you're providing and how many different people you're having speak to the reports that were provided to members. It's also important then to note that not all reports need to be approved. Some might be information only, but if nothing else, your annual report and auditor's report will need to be approved. You'll then have new business, and within there, at least, you're going to have the motion or the resolution regarding the appointment of an auditor or waiving the appointment of an auditor. So if nothing else, you'll have that in there. And generally the text of that resolution, if you are appointing an auditor, will be from the board, and the board will say, we appoint, well, say MNP, will appoint MNP to the office of auditor for the 2026 financial year, something like that. And then you'll move into an election. And again, this looks very differently for very different co-ops. Some organizations will allow candidates for director to speak and make a pitch for themselves at the AGM. Others might do that in advance. Many of our colleagues in the credit union system, they do voting in advance of the AGM, and so this section of the agenda might be for declaration of those elected. So it depends on what practices you've set out in your bylaws and some of the conventions your co-op has adopted. Then, if there's any special business, you could discuss that towards the end, and then a call for adjournment ends the meeting. But that's generally the overview for your co-op. Again, if you check out the co-op creator, and I'll share a link to the co-op creator here at the end, We do have a tool that provides annotations for your agenda. So if you're chairing a meeting, especially if it's your first time chairing, that might be a little daunting. We do have an annotated agenda designed for a chair, just with notes, just so you remember when to call for a motion, when to call for a seconder, and how to move through an agenda fairly easily. And then you can, of course, adapt that depending on what your co-op's working on for that year. Okay, so again, a few tips. Be sure to prepare those resolutions. If you need to include them in the notice, do so. Ideally, you don't want people showing up to the annual general meeting getting surprised. That might often delay things, may raise a lot of questions, might make people a bit agitated. So if you can provide people as much notice about what they're going to be discussing, I would say that's always preferable. Again, providing annotations for your board chair or whoever's chairing the meeting, that's always really helpful. Just so again, you're not going to miss anything, you're going to be well organized and present your best self. I would also recommend that go into an AGM with an open mind. More and more organizations tend to script their AGMs, make them very formal, very professional sounding. That's great. I understand why people do that. But I also think members will appreciate you if you plan to have authentic conversations. And when you ask people if they have questions and if there's anybody who wants to weigh in on a particular decision or direction that the board is going, that you actually go into that with an open mind and an open heart, and you have those authentic conversations with members. I think that lands really well and helps people participate more meaningfully in the governance of their co-op. Okay, our last section. A little bit about notice and logistics. Okay, so depending on what kind of work your co-op does, how many members it has, where you're located, how engaged people are, the logistics and the planning that goes into an AGM is going to be very, very different. Ever since COVID-19, the provinces have all made provisions in their co-op regulations to permit meeting via electronic means. So it's perfectly acceptable to use Zoom or Teams or WebEx or Lumio or whatever other software you wish to conduct your meeting. Not all co-ops provide for that in their bylaws. And so changing that to reflect that an online meeting as an option might be necessary. Or you might want to meet in person. That's also, I think, a fun way to come together, celebrate, and what have you. It obviously does add an expense. If you're renting a hall, or you're asking the treasurer to host it at their house, there is some cost or some effort that goes into meeting in person. You might also want to order refreshments. I would note, however, that that is a good incentive, perhaps, to have people attend the AGM. Again, that the charity I previously served on the board of, we operated a facility, and so we just met in the basement of that facility. It could easily hold, 75 people. We would usually have refreshments, tea, and we would usually invite a speaker to come in and share some information. Usually it would be, an organization, a service provider. We had a counselor, we had our MP once. Never hurts to provide some good incentive like that to come attend a meeting. If you are meeting over Zoom or Teams, do be mindful of the logistics attached to that. Fortunately, everybody on this call today has been well behaved and hasn't unmuted and accepted phone calls that we've had to listen to. But of course, there are like tech issues that can ensue when you're meeting online. So just be wary of those. Additionally, you may need to print materials. There might be some design costs to assembling an annual report, to sharing that with folks. If you're meeting in person, it's good. People are probably going to expect paper-based materials. So just be mindful of the printing costs and the time that goes into that. You also need to prepare member lists. So you should, of course, be maintaining a member registry for your co-op and have an up-to-date list of who is an active member in good standing that can vote at your AGM. Again, if you're meeting in person, it might be helpful to have name tags. I would make sure that people understand that when they join the meeting, if it is an online environment, they may need to update their name. I think I once hosted a workshop that had Princess Zoe join the call, but it's because the guy had his daughter use his tablet, that day. So just bear in mind that you need to confirm people's identities when they join the meeting, especially for the minutes. We need to have people's names, and so uh, share that as much in advance as you can, and then make sure you've got a process in place or some people or volunteers in place who can oversee and monitor that as you're working through things at the AGM. In terms of the notice you're providing to members, your co-op should have a bylaw provision about this. I believe in BC, you have to have at least 7 days. In the prairie provinces, it's a couple of weeks. Um, it does vary by province what's provided for in the act, but your bylaws should have final say on the time you need to give for notice. There might also be language in there about how you advertise your AGM. If you've got physical locations, advertising there would be important. Using social media is helpful. I know some cooperatives even do mailouts. There are some cooperatives with hundreds of thousands of members that mail out voting packages to all their members as a way to encourage them to participate. I'm not saying you have to do that, but that's to paint the spectrum of what members or what co-ops do. But again, consult your bylaws, see what's required, and then move forward in a way that you think will get the best engagement. And then if you are conducting special resolutions at the AGM, you will need to include that in the notice. So again, just be mindful of that. And notice doesn't have to be fancy. Again, lots of organizations will have good graphic design work done to advertise their meetings. But if you're a startup, I think we have a template on our website. You could easily do this in, Microsoft Word or PowerPoint to get a good image with good formatting. I would also highly recommend using Canva as a really good free resource that gives pretty good design work, just to add a little zhuzh to your co-op's notice. And then around your board table, and maybe with some of your staff, you're going to need to assign some roles. Because there's a lot of moving parts at an AGM, even simple ones. It's good to have a little bit of planning, a little bit of a discussion about who's doing what. How do we track for this? How do we account for these things? Do we need X, Y, or Z? And so some of the things you'll need to appoint for sure include who's the chair for the meeting. Generally, that's your board president, but not always. Who's going to be the recording secretary? Again, it might be the secretary of the board, it might be the manager, it might be your governance officer, but depending on who it is, just again, make that decision and appoint them. Let them know what's expected. If you are meeting in person, you might need some people to do check-ins. So reconcile who's coming to the meeting with whether or not their name is on the membership registry. Make sure that people who are attending are entitled to be there and entitled to vote. If you are doing voting, if you have a contested election, you're going to need folks to do ballot counting. It might also be even helpful to have scrutineers. I attended one AGM that had 11 of us, I think, vying for 3 positions on the board, and about 1,250 people voting. So very contested. Emotions were pretty high, and again, they had people serving as scrutineers, overseeing the counting of ballots. And then again, depending on how big your AGM is, or the nature of business you're doing, you might need security. So, contacting an organization that provides security is maybe a good call just to help, minimize disruptions or anything like that.
Mhm.
I've definitely been to a few AGMs where security have been present, um, often because there's been a labor dispute at the same time. So again, these are just the realities of running organizations, but keeping people safe, ensuring you can carry out the process. That's your priority for as directors. And then ask yourself, are there other things we need? Um, would we need someone like a parliamentarian who could sit in on the meeting and oversee the rules of order and ask questions on how the particular process should unfold? I've been in a few AGMs where we've had people who are what I'll call sticklers for the rules, question the process that the chair was pursuing. Um, Other people might just call them annoying. But nevertheless, if you don't feel comfortable being challenged on your knowledge of Robert's Rules of Order or whatever, meeting conventions you're pursuing, it might be helpful to have somebody fill that role. And then be sure to coordinate with your other service providers. If you're expecting your auditor to come and give an overview of the auditor's report, check in with them on their availability. Make sure that you can have someone from their office attend. If you're having staff speak to things, make sure that they'll be available, be present, and can come prepared. But again, there's often a lot of moving parts, especially for larger co-ops and credit unions. And so be mindful that a fair bit of planning needs to go into to assembling all those things into that one evening. Okay, so that's the end of the overview I've prepared. If folks are wanting some additional resources, I would definitely check out these few things. The first is the co-op creator. So this QR code should take you to the co-op creator website. On that website, there is a search bar. If there's anything you're looking for, you can probably search it and find it. So if you're looking for an agenda, just search agenda and you'll get some resources popped up. I've listed a few of the resources that we've created that are available on there that might be of use as you're planning your AGM. You can also take a browse through our resources. They're sorted into categories. The up and running section deals with a lot of the annual compliance, the things directors need to know, and some of the measures about annual meetings that, again, are going to be relevant for you. So you could certainly scroll there and see what we have available. But yeah, if you scan that QR code, you'll be able to check out the co-op creator. If you want to continue some learning beyond this webinar, we have a number of online courses that are designed for people who lead cooperatives. So boards, managers, staff, what have you. I've highlighted here what I feel is probably the most relevant for this audience. It's our co-op professionals course. That's what this QR code will take you to. And it gives an overview of what co-ops are, how they're different, and then really digs into how the membership, operations, and governance of a cooperative comes together for success. So whether you're a staff member, a director, a member, that's really what this course is designed for, and it approaches it in a really introductory way. And I should note that course is also free, so there's no cost to completing that professional development. And that's all. I appreciate folks coming out. If you want to stick around for the Q&A, I'll go back through the chat and then see if folks have any questions. But if you do need to skedaddle, that's totally fine. Here is my email and our office phone number. If you want to get a hold of us, you're certainly welcome to. If you'd like to hear from us on a regular basis, this final QR code takes you to a newsletter sign up where you'll receive some co-op tools, resources, upcoming webinars, course information, other things that will help you access information that you need. Okay, but that's all for me, folks. I'm going to go into the chat and see if we have any questions there. But if you do need to head out, I appreciate your coming today. Mm. Okay, just sifting through the introductions here. Okay, yeah, it doesn't look like there's any questions in the chat. If there's anybody still here who has a question, by all means, feel free to unmute and ask away. Hey, not hearing anything. Not seeing anything come through the chat. Okay. All right. Looks like there's no
Well,
question.
wait. What about access to the recording?
Oh yeah. It'll take us maybe a day or two to just get the recording up on our website, and then I'll share a link to that with everybody here in a few days.
Thank you.
Yeah, this way.
Thank you.
Oh, Bonnie does make a comment here. One of the biggest hurdles is getting members to the meeting. Yeah, that's pretty real. I would say especially for nonprofit cooperatives, community service co-ops, or consumer-owned cooperatives, because people's livelihood isn't attached to it. The risks associated with being a member are pretty low. People aren't going to be super interested. A worker-owned cooperative, a producer-owned cooperative, where part of their income is coming from the cooperative, they're probably going to show up a bit more readily, a bit more eagerly. For other co-ops, you might need to provide an incentive, but also, you might need to accept that people not attending could be a sign that they're pretty okay with how things are going. They're not too concerned. That one AGM I mentioned where there were 1,200 people in attendance, it was because there was a labor dispute and people were kind of pissed off. And so a big turnout's not always the most desirable outcome. But I do take the point, people showing up is a good indicator of their interest in governance. And certainly I would say maybe a better indicator is, are people seeking election? Because I would say if you've got a big membership, you don't want to end up in a position where you're having directors acclaimed. That's probably an indicator that people aren't as interested as maybe they ought to be. And if it is the case, then maybe more communication, initiating more conversations is probably a good idea to try and get people educated and aware of their role in their co-op. All right. Not seeing any other questions. I think we can call it there. I'll stop the recording.